Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, Israel pushing ahead with its attacks on Hamas's terrorist infrastructure in Gaza as the Biden administration's national security advisor visits Israel, reportedly pressing it to change its military operations to avoid civilian casualties. We're going to bring you a look at this growing rift. Intelligence failure. Israel intelligence officials reportedly knew about Hamas's plans for attacks before October 7th, but didn't take them seriously. Argentina has a new president. He is anti-establishment, pro-life, and he strongly supports Israel. And recruiting crisis for the U.S. military. Why recruiting is at the lowest levels in the last 50 years. All those stories and more today, right here on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
Let's begin this half hour with the war in the Middle East, where more Hamas fighters have surrendered as Israeli forces push deeper into Gaza, destroying terrorist infrastructure. And U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with Israel political leaders and military leaders Thursday as the U.S. is reportedly pressing Israel to shift its military operations to avoid Palestinian civilian casualties, even as it acknowledges Israel's need to defeat Hamas. But as CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl reports, Israel is not backing down on its military campaign.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanked National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan for U.S. support in supplying munitions, blocking UN attempts for a ceasefire, and assistance in returning the hostages. But Sullivan pressured Israeli leaders to shift from all-out war on Hamas by airstrikes and ground assaults in Gaza to more targeted operations. This amid a growing rift between Israel and the U.S. over civilian casualties, wrapping up the war and the future of Gaza.
He did talk about possible transitioning from what we would call high-intensity operations, which is what we're seeing them do now, to lower-intensity operations sometime, in the near future. But I don't want to put a timestamp on it. I think you can understand that the last thing we'd want to do is telegraph to Hamas what they're likely to face in coming weeks and months.
President Biden emphasized protecting civilian lives while continuing the campaign against Hamas.
I want them to be focused on how to save civilian lives, not stop going after Hamas, but be more careful.
Today, Sullivan meets with the leaders of the Palestinian Authority to discuss its role in the future of Gaza and the region. Israeli President Isaac Herzog said security is first and foremost in future negotiations.
I truly believe in a horizon of peace. I believe it's feasible. But before getting there, we have to deal with some core issues. The behavioral mode of our partners, and how do we secure the safety and well-being of Israelis and Palestinians.
Israel's ambassador to the UK, Tzipi Hotovely, went a step further, telling British broadcaster Sky News there's no negotiating with Hamas and no chance for the two-state solution that was laid out 30 years ago in the Oslo Accords.
I think it's about time for the world to realize the Oslo paradigm failed on the 7th of October, and we need to build a new one. The reason the Oslo Accords failed is because the Palestinians never wanted to have a state next to Israel. They want to have a state from the river to the sea.
As the fighting continues, the IDF says dozens of Hamas terrorists are surrendering.
Instead of pictures that we're used to seeing of military parades, we saw pictures of dozens of terrorists, today included, coming out of their hiding place in a hospital in Jabalia with raised weapons and giving themselves in for interrogation by the IDF forces and the General Security Service.
Meanwhile, heightened alert in Europe as German and Dutch officials arrested 4 suspected terrorists alleged to be members of Hamas in plots to attack Jewish institutions. At about the same time, in an unrelated case, Denmark and the Netherlands arrested 4 others suspected of terror-related offenses. In Israel, people celebrated the last day of Hanukkah with prayers and memorials for the hostages. In Jerusalem's Old City, Hanukkahs were lit for each of the more than 130 hostages. Rabbi Moshe Zeldman said lighting the candles is like sending up a flare, an SOS to God.
I need you to come to me, to lift me up, to pick me up. Because sometimes I'm just so overwhelmed that I can't get it together on my own.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
You can see more from the Middle East with our CBN News team this evening on the CBN News channel at 8 p.m. You can also watch it on the CBN News app or on YouTube. The Netanyahu government is facing internal criticism over the October 7th attacks. New reports indicate Israeli intelligence officials had advanced knowledge of Hamas's plan and dismissed it as unrealistic. Chuck Holton reports now from Jerusalem on this critical failure.
October 7th, Hamas launched an attack resulting in 1,200 fatalities, marking a significant oversight by Israeli intelligence. Despite having a detailed 40-page operation plan named Jericho Wall, according to the New York Times, Israeli authorities underestimated Hamas's capabilities, dismissing their plans as overly ambitious.
Obviously, this is the worst intelligence failure in the history of the state of Israel. It's one of the worst intelligence failures, it seems, in the history of modern warfare, humanity, or states. And obviously, there will be an accounting held. But right now, Israel seems across the board overwhelmingly, sure, there are political pressures and their voices, but overall seems to be united in the understanding that right now there is an existential enemy outside trying to destroy the people of Israel, the state of Israel, the Jews.
The attack reportedly mirrored Hamas's strategic plan, a combination of rocket barrages and drones aimed at crippling security systems, along with gunmen using diverse transport methods, successfully breached Israeli defenses.
Any objective listener or observer is going to agree that, yeah, it was an intelligence failure, that the enemy could plan and organize that many thousands of fighters to breach in 30 different breach points, come through the fence, and do that kind of damage. However, yes, intelligence services collect a lot of intelligence, and it's hard to determine what is perfect and accurate intelligence versus what is conjecture.
But this isn't the first time Israel has had to overcome these challenges.
The Israelis have a long history of overestimating their capabilities against their enemies and underestimating the threat when it comes to the Arabs specifically. In both the 1967 and the 1973 wars, the Israelis almost lost their country because they didn't pay attention to the warning signs that were everywhere. And that should have served as a lesson in this war with Hamas. But unfortunately, they fell prey to the same hubris this time as well.
So yes, there might have been indications, warnings a year before. The fact is, we know this because the players involved have said so.
I had some operations orders translated. They were done by people who were Syrian, by Egyptians, and by people in the UAE. And every single one of those guys said, this operations order is the way Persian people talk. So I think a lot of this might have been planned in Iran.
The aftermath of the attack raises critical concerns in how Israel identifies and reacts to credible threats.
Israel knew about some of this information, but they considered it aspirational. When you think about it, this seemed like such an off-the-wall attack. You're using hang gliders and so on. Who would have thought of that? And who wants to be the guy that puts their career on the line and says, hey, guess what? Qassam is going to attack with hang gliders.
Before they spend any effort on deciding who to blame, however, Israel needs to win the war.
It has to go way past that. And, contra the pressure coming in from the world to create a state governed by the Palestinian Authority, which is no less genocidal, no less evil than Hamas, there needs to be a complete change in how Israel relates to those hostile populations that surround it.
Chuck Holton, CBN News, Jerusalem.
I want to turn now to South America, where Argentina's new president faces a fight to pull his country out of economic and political chaos. Javier Milei is anti-establishment, pro-life, and strongly supports Israel. He's warning his countrymen to brace for tough days ahead. George Thomas has more from Buenos Aires.
On the steps of Argentina's University of Buenos Aires, family and friends met recently to celebrate a milestone in the lives of their loved ones. Felipe, Carla, and dozens of students joining the ranks of Argentina's newly minted law school graduates. But amidst the pomp and circumstance, deep concern among them about the economic and political future of their country.
It is really bad in Argentina economy today.
I'm not optimistic because we are used to always getting the same from politicians. We hope for change, but nothing ever happens.
Argentina's new president, Javier Milei, warning his countrymen this week to brace for drastic spending cuts not seen in a generation.
We are going to begin the reconstruction of Argentina after more than 100 years of decline. And although we are going to have to endure a period of hardness, we are going to succeed. There is no night that has not been defeated by the day.
Milei, a populist outsider often dubbed Argentina's Donald Trump because of his anti-establishment, pro-gun and pro-family stance, shocked the country by winning November's presidential contest.
I think the mixture of him being an outsider with little political experience, but someone with a very rigid ideology, makes him an enigmatic figure when we consider how he will govern a complex country in such a complex situation.
Milei faces a titanic challenge.
The biggest challenge is economic, and it requires significant shock therapy.
South America's second largest economy and once one of the richest countries in the world is now dead broke.
I feel anxious. We're facing a difficult situation and we don't know what's going to happen.
Inflation is at a staggering 140% and expected to reach 200% next year.
Every week prices change and it's very difficult to plan for something or save money. You don't even know if the value of the things is cheap or expensive. It changes all the time, and most of the time your salary doesn't keep up with the inflation.
4 in 10 Argentines live in poverty, and with recession looming, its peso in free fall, and the country drowning in debt, Milei says only radical change can pull his country out from economic abyss. His first order of business this week, slashing Argentina's government from 18 ministries to 9.
The conclusion is that there is no alternative to adjustment and there is no alternative to shock measures.
Meanwhile, President Milei has made indications that he plans to make his administration one of the most pro-Israel governments in Argentina's history, at a time when other Latin American countries have actually been very critical of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy against Hamas.
It's very possible that he will move the Argentinian embassy to Jerusalem, symbolic though it is as a gesture. It's a very important one.
Argentina, home to South America's largest Jewish population, is closely watching Israel's war against Hamas. Milei met with Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen a day before his swearing in.
I support Israel's full right to defend itself against those attacks. In addition to that, we've launched the proposal to declare Hamas a terrorist organization.
George Thomas, CBN News, Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Coming up, here at home, the U.S. military is facing a massive shortfall in recruiting, one of the worst in 50 years, and Congress is trying to find out why. We're going to bring you the story when we come back. Stay with us. America's military is experiencing one of the worst recruiting shortfalls in 50 years, and that's true even in a year of big bonuses and lowered enlisted requirements. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are seeking answers to the crisis. CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke brings us that story from Washington.
In fiscal year 2023, the military branches collectively missed their recruiting goals by approximately 41,000 recruits. Wednesday, representatives from each testified about the underlying causes behind the shortfall.
30 years ago, when I was in high school, 40% of youth had a parent that served. But today, that number is under 13%.
While witnesses outlined challenges ranging from getting recruiters into schools during COVID to a decrease in eligibility, Republicans zeroed in on polling that suggests the problem is because the military has become, quote, the administration's next social justice project.
This poll, which we can all read, found that 73% of veterans believe that the U.S. military has become too political regarding race, gender, and sexuality. Even worse, a quarter of the veterans would tell a young person not to enlist.
We're now at the third time having this conversation about recruiting, and rather than actually listening to the genuine experts here who are saying it's complicated, because indeed it is complicated, we are still marching out these kinds of Breitbart, the provenance unknown questionnaires.
When cadets, military families, active duty members stop bringing us these issues, then we'll stop talking about it. But as long as they are, we have a duty to address these issues.
Only 2 military branches met their active duty enlisted recruiting goals for 2023, the Marine Corps and the Space Force. Alex Wagner, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, credits the success to a pilot program waiving previous requirements on body composition, tattoo placement, and THC use.
These and other efforts result in approximately 2,900 new enlisted accessions in FY23. That's 2,900 high-quality individuals with a propensity to serve that would have otherwise been excluded.
All branches admit it's critical to find ways to persuade Gen Z to take an interest in military service. That's because as one of the most tech-savvy generations, their skill sets will likely be key to future military readiness. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Still ahead, the race for the Republican nomination to run for president may be over before it's even started. Former President Donald Trump is far ahead. So far, in fact, some members of his party just want to move on and focus on defeating President Joe Biden. We're going to have that story for you right after this. Former President Donald Trump is dominating his Republican rivals in the polls in the race for the nomination to run for the White House, and he is so far ahead. Some Republicans feel the party should just coalesce around him in a united attempt to defeat President Biden. CBN's chief political analyst David Brody looks into the strategy.
Normally, a presidential primary is full of high drama. Donald Trump's huge poll numbers, however, has changed that dynamic. Former Trump administration official Mark Lauder sums it up.
This is really the first time in history where we do not have a hypothetical campaign going on.
With Trump seemingly untouchable, it has certain Republicans calling on the RNC, the Republican National Committee, to embrace the former president and focus party resources on a general election matchup against President Biden.
Why are we having any more debates? Donald Trump's going to be the nominee. Why are you not hiring ballot chasers? Filing lawsuits in the early states. How does that help us get closer to Joe Biden? The answer, it doesn't.
The message seems to be getting through, as the RNC isn't officially hosting any more debates. As for the candidates, big endorsements of the past may not pack the same punch as they once did. While Ron DeSantis has received backing from leading Iowa evangelical leader Bob Vander Plaats and Governor Kim Reynolds, Trump remains dominant. Nikki Haley received the coveted support of the powerful Koch political network, plus New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu's endorsement just this week. So far, nothing has seemed to weaken Trump's standing among primary voters.
What do you make of how what we normally have seen as kind of big deals aren't as big deals in this cycle?
I actually think it's a trend that's been growing for the last 20 plus years or so. In the day and age of constant information, instant information at the flip of your phone to anything you want to know about every candidate, we don't need third-party endorsers.
That dynamic, combined with the Trump factor, leaves a dwindling GOP field struggling to gain traction.
The fact that there really hasn't been anyone to emerge as someone that could take Donald Trump's support away is striking.
While ABC News political director Rick Klein acknowledges this weakness, he's not yet ready to call the race.
What is the strategy then at this point for these candidates? Is it the implosion strategy? Just hope that he implodes or fumbles the ball at the goal line, in essence, with less than 2 minutes to go?
And you don't really know until the last couple of plays of the game what's going to happen. And if someone surprises in Iowa and or New Hampshire, the first two states to vote, it's a totally different contest.
What's also different is that while Trump hasn't debated at all, his poll numbers keep climbing. Could that change when voting begins?
It's a good 2023 strategy for Donald Trump, but is it a 2024 strategy? When we're in it, and when voters are dialed in truly to the reality of the race 6 weeks from now, does he still not engage?
Whatever happens, Trump's unconventional strategy of not engaging will be one studied for decades to come.
You know, there's going to be generations of politicians that will try to recreate what Donald Trump has done. He has changed the way that campaigns are run. He has changed the rules and the expectations, and everything has worked, to his political benefit so far.
And there's no indication that anything will change in this very unusual 2024 GOP primary election. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
We'll be right back with an encouraging word for your weekend ahead. Stay with us. And welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. Time now for your Friday Faithful. Today I want to leave you with this thought. There is no fall to drop you beneath the reach of the hand of God, and no rise to remove you from his sight. He sees all, he knows all, and he wants what's best for you. He is your creator, your father, and no one loves and wants you more. To that word, make this a fabulous Friday, and be sure to have yourself a wonderful and restful weekend. That will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can always find more of our news programs on the CBN News channel at any time, as well as online, cbnnews.com. Take a moment. Let us know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. We'll see you Monday. Goodbye. God bless.